Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Cheryl Murray.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Cheryl Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under this government, there are over 1 million new jobs, with the help of companies like Lantern Quarry in South East Cornwall, who are investing in and training young people. We were told that the government has a programme which would clearly lead to the disappearance of 1 million jobs. Isn't it time for the party opposite who said that to admit they were wrong and to apologise?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The British economy is on the mend. We see unemployment coming down, the numbers in work going up, our growth rate now forecast to be almost 3 times as fast as German growth. And frankly, the party opposite and the leader of the opposition told us we would lose 1 million jobs. He was absolutely wrong, and it's time he got to his feet and told us he was wrong.
Mr. Speaker, having listened to the Select Committee hearing yesterday, can the Prime Minister tell us what's the difference? Can the Prime Minister tell us what's the difference between his...
Order. Can I just say to the Prime Minister's PPS, his role is to nod his head in the appropriate places and to fetch and carry notes. No noise required. Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, having listened to the Select Committee hearing yesterday, can the Prime Minister tell us what's the difference between his policy on energy and that of the energy companies?
Not a word of apology about predicting 1 million jobs lost. They got it wrong and they can't bear to admit it.
What order? The question must be heard and the answers must be heard, however long it takes. Some people need to get used to the fact that that's what the public would like to see from the House of Commons. The Prime Minister.
In the energy market is more competition and lower levies and charges to drive profits and prices down. But what we've learned, Mr. Speaker, in the last week is this competition should include switching. At the dispatch box, he said, "I'll tell the Prime Minister what is a con, telling people that the answer is to switch their suppliers." But what did we find out over the last few days? He switched his supplier. Yes! He went for one of these insurgent companies to cut his bills. Isn't it typical? He comes here every week and attacks Tory policy. He goes home and he adopts Tory policy to help his own family.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing people need to do if they want somebody to stand up against the energy companies, they need to switch the Prime Minister, and that is what they know. Now, as the unofficial spokesman for the energy companies, maybe he can answer the question that they couldn't answer yesterday. Can he explain why, when wholesale prices have hardly moved since a year ago, retail prices are rising by around 10%?
Because we need both competition and rolling back the costs of charges. But look, switching is part of competition. And the company that he switched to has this to say about his energy freeze. Let's listen to the people providing his energy. They said this: "A policy like this is potentially problematic for an independent provider. Bluntly, it could put me under." So that is his policy, not listening to the people providing his energy, but having less choice, less competition, higher prices. It's the same old Labour.
He had no answer to the question. And I'll explain something quite simple to him. You see, most energy companies don't want a price freeze, right? and most consumers do. Right, that's why the energy companies are against the price freeze. I mean, he's so on the side of the energy companies, Mr. Speaker, we should call them the Big Seven, the Prime Minister and the Big Six energy companies. In opposition, he said this. He said there was a problem in the relationship between wholesale and retail prices. And he went on to say, the first thing you've got to do is give the regulator the teeth to order that those reductions are made. And that is what we would do. Mr. Speaker, why, when it comes to the energy companies, has he gone from Rambo to Bambi in 4 short years?
Who was it who gave us the Big Six? Yes, when Labour first looked at this, there were almost 20 companies. But because of his stewardship, we ended up with 6 players. Now, they talk about a price freeze, but down the corridor, they've been voting for a price rise. That is right. They voted for a decarbonisation target that everyone accepts would rise prices. Now, if he wants a price freeze, why has he just voted for a price rise?
It's just so hard to keep up with this Prime Minister on green levies, isn't it? Because this is what he was saying in January. Believe it or not, he was boasting about the size of his green levies. He said this, I kid you not. He said, and I quote, "Eco was many times the size of the scheme it replaced." So when it comes to green, as short a time ago as January, he was saying the bigger, the better. And now he says the opposite. Now here's the problem. Here's the problem. On competition, here's the problem. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. He wants a review. He wants a review on energy policy, but that's exactly what the energy companies want. A long inquiry, kicking the problem into the long grass. How will a review the reports next summer help people to pay their bills this winter?
We want a competition inquiry that starts straight away. That is our policy. But the point about voting for a price rise, he has to answer, because this is what the former Labour energy spokesman, Lord Donoghue, said in the House of Lords. And he should listen to this. He was their energy spokesman. He said this: "I have never spoken against a Labour amendment in 28 years in this House, but I am troubled by the consequences for ordinary people. The amendment will raise the cost of living and is in conflict with a future price freeze." That is it from Labour's own policy spokesman of the past in the Lords. The fact is, the whole country can see he's a one-trick pony and he's run out of road.
Let me tell him, if he wants to talk about what people are saying,
Order! Members can try to recover some semblance of calm. It will be good for their health, beneficial to their well-being. They must try to grow up even after the age of 60. Ed Miliband.
If he wants to talk about what people are saying, his own former Tory Environment Secretary, the man he put in charge of the Climate Change Committee, says his figures are false. That is what he says. Now, instead of having a review, he's got an opportunity to do something for the public next week. He's got an energy bill going through Parliament. Instead of sitting on his hands, he could amend that bill to institute a price freeze now. We'll support a price freeze. Why doesn't he act?
Because it's not a price freeze, it's a price con. And the fact is, he is hiding behind this economically illiterate policy because he can't talk about the economy because it's growing. He can't talk about unemployment because it's falling. He can't talk about the deficit because it's come down. He's got nothing else to say. He's just a weak leader with no ideas.
I'll tell you who's weak. Is this Prime Minister too weak to stand up to the energy companies? Nothing less than a price freeze will do, because this is the only way we can deal with the energy companies overcharging. It's time he started acting like a Prime Minister standing up for consumers and stopped acting like a PR man for the energy companies.
I tell you what is weak. Too weak to stand up and admit their economic failures. Too weak to stand up to Len McCluskey, who tried to wreck Scotland's petrochemical industry. And too weak to stand up to the Shadow Chancellor on HS2.
Order! Mr. Gwynne! Recover your composure, man! You're wholly out of control! The Prime Minister!
Let us just examine what has happened with HS2 this week. The Shadow Chancellor touring the radio studios, telling everyone it won't go ahead. Labour local authority leaders begging the Leader of the Opposition to stand up for this infrastructure scheme. And what's he done? Cowered in his office, too weak to make a decision. To put it another way, Britain deserves better than that lot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, businesses created three times as many jobs in the private sector as were lost in the public sector. So is it not high time, Prime Minister, that those who made daft, mystic predictions that we would not be able to create as many private jobs as were lost in the public sector should go on to admit that they got it wrong?
Friend is absolutely right. They should admit they got it wrong. Let us just remember what the Leader of the Opposition said. As late as March 2012, he said this: "You're not going to be able to replace the jobs in the public sector quickly enough with jobs in the private sector." The fact is, we've now got 1 million more people employed in our country, 1.4 million private sector jobs, but they're too weak to admit they got it wrong.
Gavin Shuker!
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister believe that the A&E crisis in the NHS has anything to do with the fact that he's cut 6,000 nurses since coming to power?
What we see in the NHS is 23,000 fewer non-clinical grades, actually bureaucrats and managers taken out of the NHS, and we see 4,000 more clinical staff, including over 5,000 more doctors in our NHS. That is the change we've seen. But just imagine if we'd listened to Labour and cut the NHS budget. We believe in the NHS and we've invested in it.
Hampshire Chamber of Commerce reported in the last quarterly economic survey real business optimism, with a rise in the number of local firms employing more staff, an increase in UK orders and a 10% increase in sales. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this is evidence that the government's economic plan is working and the party opposite got it wrong?
My honourable friend is right. We had to take tough decisions, but growth is there, unemployment is falling, the number of people in work is rising, we have 400,000 more businesses in this country, and if we had listened to the Shadow Chancellor, who said we were in for a lost decade of growth, we would have higher debts, higher interest rates, it would be the same old outcome under the same old Labour.
Yvonne Favart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a recent survey from YouSwitch, 75% of people said they switched their heating off on one or more occasions last winter. Does the Prime Minister expect this number to go up or down this winter due to his inability to stand up to the energy companies?
Well, fuel poverty went up under Labour, and under this government we've maintained the winter fuel payments, we have increased the cold weather payments, and we've increased the benefits that the poorest families get in our country. That is the action that we've taken, and we can only afford to do that because we've taken tough and sensible decisions on the economy.
Mr. Andrew Jones.
A few days ago, I launched the business case for the electrification of the Harrogate to Knaresborough rail line, which will mean more trains, faster services and better rolling stock. After the last government electrified just 9 miles in 13 years, will my right honourable friend continue to prioritise rail electrification?
Well, he makes a very good point. The last government did just 9 miles of electrification in 13 years. An absolutely pathetic record. We are putting £1 billion into modernising railways in the north of England. And let's just look again at this issue of HS2. We all know it needs cross-party agreement to make this important infrastructure scheme go ahead. And what a pathetic spectacle we've seen this week. 1 minute they're for it, then they're against it, and the Leader of the Opposition too weak to make a decision.
I've come
across a very interesting interview given by the Prime Minister to the Times, during which he had to stop off at his constituency office, as in his words, he needed to turn the heating on just so it's a bit nicer when I get back this afternoon. How many of my constituents does he think will be able to afford such niceties as we approach this winter?
What his constituents will understand is that their price freeze is a price con. Prices would go up beforehand, prices would go up afterwards, and as he himself has admitted, they wouldn't even be able to keep their promise because they don't control gas prices. That is why everyone knows it's a con.
Simon Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My 20-year-old constituent, Liam Burgess from Llansteffan in Carmarthen, left school involuntarily at 16 and was told the only choice ahead of him was which prison he might end up in. 4 years later, and he's running and owning one of Wales's best chocolate brands, Nom Nom. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the record number of new business start-ups, the positive economic signs, are actually as much down to people like Liam Burgess as they are the excellent work of the Chancellor?
I certainly join my honourable friend in paying tribute to his constituent and the way that he's turned his life around and the way he's contributing to our economy. We do see 400,000 more businesses now up and running in our country. Of course, Labour don't want to hear about success stories. They don't care. They don't care about enterprise. They don't care about small businesses. But it's this enterprise and this small business that's turning our country around.
Mr. Speaker, there's a new flat that's just been launched in my constituency, and it's been built partly as a result of public money under the government's affordable housing scheme known as Share to Buy. It's a two-bedroom flat, it's in Pear Tree Court, it's £720,000. Does the Prime Minister believe this to be affordable, and if so, to whom?
We need to build more houses in our country, and that is why we're reforming the planning system, which they oppose. That's why we've introduced Help to Buy, which they oppose, which is why we put extra money into affordable housing, which they oppose. They are now the Build Absolutely Nothing Anywhere party, and as a result, housing will become less affordable.
Paul Uppal. Mr. Speaker.
Over the last few decades, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty in India and China globally. As those people have increased their living standard, their energy demands have increased as well. Would my right honourable friend agree that if we are to have sustainable, long-term and cheap energy, the innovative deal which the Chancellor heralded a few weeks with the Chinese initiative is crucial, much rather than short-term political gimmicks?
I do think it's a very important step forward to encourage inward investment into our country to help fund our nuclear programme. I think that actually means we're going to have dependable supplies of low-carbon electricity long into the future. And to the people who oppose foreign investment, and it sounds like now the party opposite oppose foreign investment. With all the flip-flops they've done this week, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they didn't start opposing nuclear energy too. But by getting this foreign investment in means we can use our firepower to build hospitals, to build schools, to build roads and railways and modernise our country.
Katie Clark.
Does the Prime Minister believe that Royal Mail was undervalued?
I think when you consider that Royal Mail in the past was losing billions of pounds, the whole country is far better off with Royal Mail in the private sector. I just talked about flip-flops. Here's another one from the Labour Party. Who was it who said we needed to privatise Royal Mail in the first place? Anyone? Anyone? Where's Peter Mandelson when you need him? They said we needed private capital. I agree. They said we need private management. I agree. But it's taken this government to deliver the policy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 1.5 million jobs created by business and 400,000 new businesses, last month's figures in Worcester showed the biggest monthly fall in unemployment on record. Unemployment is now down over 30% since its peak under Labour. Would the Prime Minister agree that by backing business and supporting businesses to grow, we can undo Labour's legacy of unemployment?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. whoever was in government right now would have to be making difficult reductions in the public sector, and obviously that leads to the reduction of some public sector jobs. So we need a strong private sector recovery, and that's what we've seen. 1.4 million more jobs in the private sector, meaning that overall there are 1 million more people employed in our country. That is 1 million reasons to stick to our plan and reject the medicine suggested by the party opposite.
Sheridan.
Why don't they cheer the answers anymore?
The Prime Minister, current legislation to protect agency workers was designed to stop the exploitation of migrant workers, but also to protect the wages and conditions of our indigenous workers. I know the Prime Minister has been lobbied on this issue, but can he reassure the House that he will resist any temptation to dilute even further protection for agency workers?
Well, what I want to see is more jobs in this country, and that means making sure we keep our flexible workforce. But of course, what the honourable gentleman didn't tell us is, of course, he chairs the Unite group of Labour MPs. So perhaps he ought to declare that when he stands up. And while he's at it, perhaps he can have a word with Mr McCluskey and say that we need to have a proper inquiry in what happened in Unite, a proper inquiry into what happened in Grangemouth, because we all know the leader of the Labour Party is too weak to do it himself.
Mr. Speaker, the economy has grown 1.5% in the last 6 months, during which time in the Chippenham constituency the number of job seekers has fallen by 1/5. Raising living standards requires greater productivity from a workforce which is highly skilled. But in Chippenham, hopes were dashed 5 years ago when the National College Building Programme ran out of money. Will the Prime Minister join me in backing Wiltshire College's bid to the Skills Funding Agency to rebuild our Chippenham campus to fit for local students to gain the skills employers demand?
You know what, I very much agree with what my honourable friend said. We all remember the huge disappointment when Labour's planned investment collapsed in so many of our colleges. I saw exactly the same thing in Abingdon and Whitney College, and it's this government that's now putting the money in to see that expansion and that improvement and that better quality colleges into place. And I'm sure that can happen in Wiltshire as well as Whitney.
Mr. Peter Hain.
Since 2/3 of the green levies on people's energy bills were established under this government, why has the Prime Minister been attacking himself?
But he's wrong. The fact is, many of the green levies were put in place by the party opposite. But let me remind him, one of the first acts of this government was to take the £179 renewable heat initiative, which the leader of the Labour Party wanted to put on every single person's bill in the country. We took that and we took it off the bill.
Heather Wheeler.
Will the Prime Minister join with me in congratulating the workforce at Toyota in my constituency, as well as manufacturers across the country whose hard work has ensured that car production went up by 10% in the last year?
Well, I certainly join my honourable friend, and I remember my own visit to Burniston in Derby. Look, again, they don't want to hear good news about manufacturing. They don't want to hear good news about our car industry. The fact is, this country is now a net exporter of cars again, and we should be congratulating the workforce at Toyota. We should be congratulating the workforce at Jaguar Land Rover. We should be praising what they're doing at Nissan. These companies are leading and re-industrialisation of our country. I was at the Cowley Works on Monday, where the Mini, which is doing brilliantly, is leading to more jobs, more apprenticeships, more employment, more skills. All things we welcome under this government.
Tasha Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for launching our report on electoral conduct yesterday, which found some shocking examples of racism and discrimination during election campaigns. I would like to ask the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, whether he will back our call to get political parties, the Electoral Commission and the Equality and Human Rights Commission to work more proactively now in areas of tension, so that the next general election can be a battle of ideas and not race hate and discrimination.
Yeah, well, I very much welcome what the honourable lady says, and I welcome the report of the all-parliamentary inquiry into electoral conduct. I will study the report closely. If there's anything we can do on a cross-party basis to make sure we keep this sort of disgusting racism out of politics, then certainly we should do so.
Mr. Andrew Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the government's Regional Growth Fund, £8.8 million is being spent reopening the Todmorden and Curve rail link, cutting travel times between Burnley and Manchester in half. However, better rail connections to the south of England are also vital. Does the Prime Minister not agree with me? It is absolutely outrageous for the party opposite to be challenging HS2 at the current time, putting in jeopardy jobs and investment in the north of England.
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to stand up for his constituents, to stand up for the north of England, because there is a real danger with Labour's antics that they are letting down the north of England, letting down the Midlands. Let me remind the Shadow Chancellor of what he said about these transport investments. He said this: "Nowhere is consensus more essential than on our national infrastructure." He said this: "Successive governments have ducked or delayed vital decisions on our national infrastructure, allowing short-term politics to get in the way." That is what, by his own words, he is found guilty of short-termism, of petty politicking, rather than looking after the national interest.
Sean James.
I'm very surprised that the Prime Minister is prepared to gamble along with the Justice Minister on his proposals for the probation service, especially in light of the early tests and trials actually being called to a halt. Is he prepared to gamble, especially with the lives and the daily safety of my constituents and other people in this country, and will his gambling luck hold out?
What we want with the probation service is a service that is much more focused on getting results, on stopping reoffending, and also making sure that we give people services in terms of rehabilitation from the moment that they leave prison. That doesn't happen today. But it is interesting, Mr. Speaker, 26 minutes past 12 and not one question from Labour on the economy. They've got nothing to say. They've got nothing to offer. They are embarrassed that prediction after prediction was completely wrong.
Scott!
Like my right honourable friend, I agree.
Order. A question from the honourable member must and it will be heard. Mr. Lee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like my right honourable friend, I welcome the fall in unemployment, indeed down to 3.7% in my own Ilford North constituency. But will he recognise with me that one of the biggest problems is young people with special needs, particularly autism, Asperger's, and getting them into work, and congratulate the London Borough of Redbridge and Interface Parents Group, where the project which I initiated has now started with the first young people with special needs in work.
I know my honourable friend's close attention to this issue and deep care about this issue. I certainly pay tribute to Redbridge and to all those who help children with special needs. Through our reform of special needs, we've tried to focus the help on those that need it most to make sure they get the help they need.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've got a question on the economy for the Prime Minister. Minister agree with his own advisers that the government's youth contract is failing to tackle, and I quote, the appallingly high levels of youth unemployment?
What we've seen with the youth contract is thousands of young people getting work through our work experience scheme. It has been more successful than the Future Jobs Fund, but has cost 6 times as little. Through the youth contract, we've also seen over 20,000 young people get work opportunities. That's why we see the youth claimant count coming down so rapidly in our country. There is still far more to do to get young people into work, but the fact that we have backed over 1.5 million apprenticeships is a sign about how much we care about getting young people back to work.
Dr. Julian Hupper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with President Obama that there need to be additional constraints on how we gather and use intelligence, that we need to more effectively weigh the risks and rewards of our activities? Will the Prime Minister follow the President's lead?
Well, what I've said in the House before, and I'll repeat again, obviously will always listen to what other countries have to say about these issues, but I believe that in Britain we have a good way of having intelligence and security services, having them overseen by a parliamentary committee, having their work examined by intelligence commissioners, and ensuring that they act under a proper legal basis. I take those responsibilities very, very seriously, but I believe we have a good system in this country, and we can be proud of the people that work in it and proud of the people that oversee it.
Mr. David Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, we've recently learned that energy security in this country is being outsourced to the Chinese and the French, that the lights may go out, that pensions will freeze this year, and we've got no control over the Big Six. Does the Prime Minister have any regrets about the kind of privatisation of the utilities by the former Tory government and the decimation of the most technically advanced coal industry in the world?
What I would say to the honourable gentleman in terms of energy security is that he backed a government that in 13 years never built a single nuclear power station. Oh, they talked about it. Boy, did they talk about it, but they never actually got it done. And in terms of Chinese and French investment, I think we should welcome foreign investment into our country, building these important utilities so we can use our firepower for the schools and the hospitals and the roads and the railways we need.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are, in my constituency, shortly to be over 100 wind turbines, and there are about another 30 or 40 in the planning system. These turbines are paid for by my constituents, but they're not constructed here or creating many jobs in my constituency. When the Prime Minister rightfully reviews green taxes, can he ensure that the changes to green subsidies ensure that the jobs in that sector of energy are actually here in the United Kingdom?
Well, I know how hard my honourable friend has worked with other MPs on a cross-party basis right across the Yorkshire and Humberside region to try and attract investment into our country, and we should continue to target that investment.
Ian Lucas.
Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to the positive role played by trade unions in the work of the Automotive Council, which has brought about the renaissance in the UK car industry?
I think the Automotive Council has been extremely successful, and where trade unions play a positive role, I'll be the first to praise them. But where frankly we have a real problem with a rogue trade unionist at Grangemouth who nearly brought the Scottish petrochemical industry to its knees, we need to have a proper inquiry, a Labour inquiry. If they had any courage, any vision, any strength of decision-making, they'd recognise they need to have that inquiry and get to the bottom of what happened.
Order.